Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. This is from WFP Armenia. I'm really happy to have you on board today, where we're going to talk about how we have been integrating behavioral science across all programs to accelerate progress towards the zero hunger. Do note we're recording this session. I hope you don't mind. And we've also asked you to write in the chat where you're calling from. So we wanted to take this opportunity to really show and explain to you how we are taking behavior science into programming from a country office perspective. So really having some very practical examples on how we have been doing it, what have been some of our challenges and reflections around that. Before we start, let me introduce the team. My name is Nana. I'm the Deputy Country Director in Armenia at the moment, and I'm here with Rovina, who is our head of the Social Behaviours Change Unit, and with Ivory, who is the head of Food Value Chain Unit. Now, just a little bit on the agenda on what we're going to present today. We just want to talk a little bit about what WFP is doing. It won't take that long, don't worry. A little country overview, then looking into how we were approaching behavior change from this country office perspective, and then some really practical examples on how we're actually doing it and how we managed to convince this staff as well. Now, WFP at a glance, most of you probably know WFP is an agency that is supporting zero hunger. So we are working towards SDG 2, contributing, also doing that under partnerships SDG number 17, understanding achieving zero hunger has to be done in partnerships. The narrative, the objectives of WFP, and you see my funky background here, is really around changing lives and saving lives. Most of you probably know WFP as a saving lives organization, but in recent years, a lot of emphasis has been done on changing lives. This is also why social behavior change suddenly becomes of huge importance in our program. Just the Armenia country context, I'm sure many of you don't even know where Armenia is. It's a very, very small country with around 3 million people. 8 million people are living outside Armenia, and it is squeezed in between Turkey, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Iran. As you can see, the risk environment as well, it's beyond being a landlocked country, it's only having 2 borders open, which is the one to Iran and to Georgia. As many other countries in the world, climate change, of course, plays a huge role here and will continue to do so. And of course, also we had conflicts in 2020. And so this is also an environment at risk. The lack of employment opportunities is quite huge. Again, this is not unique for Armenia. I think many of your countries are facing same challenges. In particular, youth employment is an issue, but here people are actually traveling outside to do seasonal labor so that they are able to send money back. That also means that remittances are quite a substantial part of the GDP. The rise of non-communicable diseases have increased, and what we see today is that 22% of the adult populations are actually not able to stay fully employed during their whole lifetime because of non-communicable diseases. It's mainly hypertension, it's diabetes 2, it's heart issues, all those related to an unhealthy lifestyle. We are facing what we call broken food systems. Things have changed quite a lot, but there's a lot of post-harvest losses, and there is a bit of a discrepancy between demand and supply, and the whole understanding on how to set prices on agricultural products and consumer goods. Now, to go back to the figures, the poverty rates are around 26%. I do have to say that with some of the recent increases on prices and the global supply chain disruptions, the World Bank came out and said that the poverty rates are expected to be around 40% this year in Armenia. The same goes for the food insecurity levels. Here, these are figures from 2019, but we are already thinking that it will be increasing to 27, even 30% due to the increased food prices in the world. As I said before, the non-communicable diseases are really quite visible here, and it means that the adult population, around half of them are already obese or overweight. Trying to understand the patterns on when does it start with this unhealthy lifestyle, it becomes clear that already from a very young age, a lot of children are not able to have the minimum acceptable diets. And as well, looking into the overweight rate already at children under 5, it's 14%. It's quite substantial. When we were trying to dig further together with WHO into understanding what are the patterns towards adulthood, we realized that already by the age of 7 and 8, almost 30% of the children are overweight. Here it says 27.7, but this is mainly the boys are already overweight by that age, quite early. So that brings us back to why we were doing social behavior change in Armenia. And I hope that you've understood some of the context on saying, well, actually, we had to really say we need to understand that humans are not rational. And humans are not just going to do what we tell them to do. If we say, please eat some more spinach, that's not necessarily going to happen, not even if it's available in the shops. They may have other preferences. So we were trying to take this approach in and trying to see how do we work with the community, how do we engage with the environment in doing behavior change. Another factor that we have really been doing here in the country office is to take away social behavior change out of the discussions only around nutrition. Social behavior change is an element that we need in all our programs, being understanding how to get demands, getting people to understand how to become more self-reliant on what they have from a food security perspective. The same thing, what happened when we then created a unit, and we are the first country office in WFP in the whole world that has a unique platform, one unit, which is dedicated to social behavior change, working with all our programs. So what happened is that at the moment, I'm almost getting calls on a daily note from different stakeholders, being government, being donors, being other implementing agencies, trying to understand how we actually make these programs. Why? Because they work. Why? Because we are just naturally assuming that people are going to do what we ask them to do, or they're not necessarily behaving the right way. So but when we're talking about the whole food systems approach, and as I promised, you will get some practical examples on how we're doing it. We were really thinking, well, one thing is to work both with the producers on producing good things, but it's also around nudging. It's also understanding the environment of which people take decisions. In Armenia, for example, we understood that the ones that are influencing decisions on what is being eaten at home is actually the children. So we do need to integrate and have the children to also work with us in order to be able to change not only their behaviors, their demands, but also the behaviors of the whole family. I am now handing over to Rowena, who can explain a little bit the approach.
Thank you very much, Nana. So as you can hear from our Deputy Country Director, we had senior management buy-in to apply behavioural science to think about social behaviour change across our programmes, which is quite a unique thing, if I'm being honest, within WFP. I was really proud of this country office because they'd kind of not done what Pooh Bear is doing here, and they actually stopped and thought, if we're to move from just this saving lives and focus on this changing lives mandate, what do we need to do differently? And behavioural science was something that they recognised as a key next step. However, although we had senior management buy-in to create a social behaviour change unit here, which is a very unique, like the only one within WFP, it wasn't always so easy to get buy-in from my peers and my colleagues who head up the different units within WFP Armenia. And I'm going to talk about some of the key challenges that we've had to address and overcome to move forward with completely integrating it across all our program areas. So the first challenge we had, if you can do the next slide, thanks. So the first challenge we had was in relation to this mentality, we're already doing this. Why are you telling us to do it when we're already doing it? So there was a belief within WFP Armenia that we already do co-creation, we already do co-discovery, co-design, we already engage with our target audience. However, with all our behaviour change projects, we've tried to do this engagement with our target audience throughout the whole process. And most importantly, in the past, what we've done is we've gone in at the start and we've engaged with people to find out what the problem is. But then we've hardly ever gone back to engage with them to find out, well, how can we empower you as a community to think about the solution? What we've normally done is we've found out the problem and then we've parachuted in a solution that is not sustainable, that might not work for that community, and most importantly, doesn't create a sense of ownership of the problem or the solution within that community. So that was one of the major challenges that we really had to address early on and say, no, you're not doing it at the moment. This is something different. The second challenge was influenced by the makeup of WFP and our programs. So if I think about how many economists there are in WFP, not behavioral economists, but you might say more traditional economists, there's lots of them. If I think about how many behavioral scientists there are in WFP, I probably could count them on one hand. Actually, I probably could count them on half a hand. So we're very outnumbered. And a lot of WFP's programs are based on this assumption that we are rational human beings, that we make rational decisions. One of our big programs that donors love, if I'm being honest, and beneficiaries love, is this cash-based transfer program. But it's based on the assumption that if we give cash to people, instead of just giving food to the most vulnerable, then people will spend that cash on healthy, nutritious food. However, the reality is not always the case, and very rarely do we take a step back and think about the cultural, behavioral, gender dynamics that interplay people's everyday decisions. Very rarely do we use that key insight to develop our programs. So, you know, when you come in and you say we need to think about how people behave and we need to think a bit differently, understanding that, as Nana was saying, humans are totally irrational, that threatens in many ways people's existing programs. The third challenge that we've had to face is this concept that we can't forget anything. We have to include all behaviours. So I spend a lot of time when we work with programs to help them focus on the behaviour, basically in that top corner where we're going to have high impact on the problem and high probability of adoption of the behaviour. Because we recognise that for different behaviours, there's different barriers to change and there's different motivations for change. However, this doesn't sit comfortably with my colleagues. An example of this will be a project from our own country office around healthy breakfasts. So in Armenia, we know that a lot of children don't eat a healthy breakfast or don't really eat any breakfast before they go to school. And then they binge on junk food because they're starving by the time they get to school or first break. So we'd worked really hard with stakeholders to agree that we would have a project focused on healthy breakfast, and that would be all we'd focus on. I went away for a little bit, I came back, and all of a sudden there was a play with dancing carrots and dancing broccoli. And when we went back to the children, they said, WFP wants us to eat carrots. So they completely missed the point because we diluted the message and we tried to include all the behaviours instead of being really focused. So that's a big challenge. And the final major challenge that I wanted to share with you, again, this is not unique to WFP, is this misunderstanding around behaviour. So many of my colleagues, but also many of the donors, do not understand the dynamic nature of behaviour. So they think, super, we've changed behaviour, tick box exercise, we don't need to worry, we don't need to do anything else. But we know from a behavioural point of view that with lots of behaviours, take smoking for example, about 70% of people who quit will restart smoking within a year. It's pretty similar type data with people who lose weight. Often they put it on again quite quickly, etc. So we very rarely get money, nor do program staff always want to focus on the maintenance of that behaviour change. So we change the behaviour, but we don't then maintain it. So these are kind of 4 of the key challenges. There's been lots of other challenges, but these are 4 of the key challenges that we've had to try and address and overcome with our projects. Some of the ways we've tried to overcome these is to find how behavioral science can add value to people's existing programs. So instead of coming in and being critical about their program, instead we've tried to look for some quick wins, some small added value that we can offer at first. Then we've carefully evaluated these kind of cheap, small changes and interventions that we've added into the existing programs using nimble trial methodology, so we get the data quick and we understand what works or works best within the different contexts. And then we've used that kind of home-based or homegrown evidence base to try and influence and integrate behavioural science even further into the programs. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Ivory, and Ivory will tell you about her attitudes towards behavioural science and social behaviour change more broadly before we set up the unit to what it is today. But to be honest, the way I introduced behaviour change was through this concept of social marketing to her. And I actually used the concept of chocolate bars because I recognised her as being a lover of chocolate bars, and it was something that she would be able to relate to. So I'm going to pass now over to my colleague, Ivory.
Thank you so much, Rowena. So yeah, I'm coming to this presentation as a team member who wasn't particularly interested in, sorry, can you hear me okay, Nana? Okay, great. Sorry, I just saw that my image froze. He wasn't particularly interested in the concept of social behaviour change, didn't have much understanding of what it was or why we even needed it. I work in a program unit which primarily looks at the agricultural component of our programming. So this is the economist that Rowena was referencing earlier. We are interested in increasing the kind of output of smallholder farmers and increasing the economic viability of their work. And we were under the impression that we were doing this incredibly well and nothing needed to change. And over the last year, we have definitely adapted our approach through integrating social behaviour change into our work. And I want to explain a little bit about how we did that through the example of a case study of just one of our projects. So we have this one project where we identified that baked goods are one of the most consumed food products in Armenia, but there is a near total absence of whole grain on the market. And what we thought was, okay, whole grain is more healthy, it's far more nutritious for the population, and as Nana was saying, there is an issue with malnutrition in Armenia. So therefore, let's support actors along the value chain to increase the growth of whole grain wheat, and then therefore there'll be more availability of this superfood in the market. So our essential goal was to increase the availability and the accessibility of this nutritious food. We have what is considered quite an innovative approach within kind of economic development programming and within WFP. So we looked at increasing both supply and demand, but not just seeing the supply as being the farmer and the demand being the consumer, but taking a full full value chain approach. So we made investments the whole way along the value chain to increase supply and demand at every single phase. So how this looked is we made small investments in smallholder farmers to increase their production. We then made investments in a mill to increase the demand for that increased amount of whole grain wheat. We made investments in bakeries so that they would be then having an increased demand to absorb that increased amount of flour that we were seeing. We made investments in distribution systems, in marketing, in packaging, and the ability to bake with whole grain so that there was then a high quality product that was available in a range of places. And then finally, we made investments in the consumer. And the way that we did this was through working with our national school feeding program to change legislation so that the wheat that was being procured was mandated to be whole grain wheat instead of white wheat, therefore creating a market through a top-down approach. And as a result, we have, as of this date, less than 2 years after the project started, over 7,000 children replacing white wheat with whole grain, which sounds impressive. But the problem is that it's limited in the outlook. Just because you create the supply doesn't mean that people will want it or will value it or will even use it. And we can see the example of this. I have beautiful results on the slides here, but the mill is currently operating at just 18% capacity. And of course, if you're the private sector, that would not be acceptable. You want to be operating at 100% capacity at all times, and then even growing so that the full potential of this product can be reached. We had to take a step back and work with the Social Behaviour Change Unit to understand there's the difference between what people need. We believe that people need whole grain to make them more healthy, to have a positive impact on their households and on their communities and on the country. However, what do they want? And what we looked at was taking a step back and understanding that agricultural programming should start with what people want and then designing the entire programming with that social behavior change, with that behavioral science lens, as opposed to just the nutrition lens. And this is really nothing new. This is what the private sector does all the time, as Rowena was saying about the chocolate bar example. This is a tool that's been done already, but the issue is that we haven't been leveraging on this as it is. And therefore, we wanted to start absorbing some private sector principles, which are not done in development programming, to really optimize the opportunity of this transformed food system. So let's look at the next slide to then understand just a few examples of how we did this so it doesn't get too technical. But firstly, we'll just talk about packaging. As I said previously, we understood that packaging was important. It's a robust packet to take the product to market. It allows us to demonstrate that we're meeting all food safety standards and that all of the business registration components are there. It allows us to meet the legal requirements and it looks nice. And this was our approach to packaging. We then started to engage with the Social Behaviour Change Unit with Rowena and showed her, okay, can you just have a look at this design? I think you're good at this. Is this a pretty design? She said, no, you've put no brand name on there. There's no recognition of what's inside the packet. It's just a picture with some nice color schemes. There's no brand personality and there's nothing here to influence consumer behavior. So we ended up something that we thought would just take a few days to sign off a pretty picture to having a back and forth and a kind of co-creation with the end users, with all of the actors along the value chain, to come up with a brand that really had some personality, that really aims to influence consumer behavior. And this was an incredibly valuable exercise for us to truly understand the best approach to developing this kind of thing and taking what essentially is a very small investment in our project to having a huge multiplier effect so that we can really look at how to build up this consumer want, how to change this consumer want. So this is one way in which we did this, and we're really, really proud of how the end packages are looking and then how the branding is working. Another way in which we did this was we're looking at co-creation. This is something that we were actually doing incredibly well up into the consumer. Co-creation is giving the people that we're targeting control over their actions. And by our approach, which invests in existing micro enterprises, a very small amount where they are co-investing, essentially they are part of the construction of this overall end product, and then they really value it and they're really invested in making it work. And this is something that we were doing up until the very end to the consumer, at which point we were saying to our partners within the government, okay, let's mandate that they have to buy a whole grain finished. Obviously, why not do co-creation there as well? Why not make them feel like they are part of this creation, this solution? And so what we did was start to look at how we can invest in the consumers as co-creators. We did this through some ways, through working, for example, with local NGOs so that they were part of the development of the whole grain value chain. We're working for cultural change at the community level, so working with bakeries to make them key trainers, giving them employment as trainers in whole grain. But then also we recognized who are the decision makers in the household in terms of what meals are eaten, and this is children. And as a result of this, we then started to host workshops, really fun cooking workshops, where children are then baking pizza, things that they like, with whole grain flour, so that when they go to the supermarket with their parents, they're then asking for that product. And then you have an actual cultural shift that changes their behavior in the long term. It changes the behavior of the whole community at the household level and then more broadly, and then you see sustainable change. And as a result of these two very small examples of how we changed our approaches, we're seeing incredible increases in the potential of this value chain. I am going to stop here and then hand over back to Nana for any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ivory. And I just want to add in, now that we're talking about it, this is a cake eating country. And so when we were having the co-creation workshops around bread and things like this, they were all coming and asking, can you help us, teach us how to make whole grain muffins or whole grain types of cakes? And instead of saying, no, this is a bad idea, we took it into account and thought, how are we then going to work with the different bakeries on actually creating a more healthy version of things that would satisfy the sweet tooth. Yeah, that was all. Any questions to the team?
Yes,
Please.
actually, I have a question. Should I ask directly in the chat or via voice or right in the chat?
Do via voice so we can have a discussion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Armenia. I'm a behavioral economist actually at Cardiff Business School. And previously, I was working with UNDP in Armenia to champion this behavioral science work in UNDP and the Armenian government. And yeah, my question is the following. I mean, as a scientist in academia, I'm a bit obsessed with methodologies. So my question was, what kind of methodologies are you using in the country office to kind of test the impact of these interventions? For instance, are you doing randomized controlled trials, or are you doing some sort of experiments, say survey experiments or some other type of stuff? Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello and welcome to the presentation. It's nice that you know the Armenian context as well. Yeah, so we're very aware that the gold standard within the behavioural science field is the randomised control trial. The reality is WFP don't have the capacity to do that. We don't have the capabilities in-house, and we certainly don't have the money to do it, if I'm being completely honest. We did get some quotes for randomized controlled trials, external evaluations, and they were far more than we'd been spending on the intervention and the development of the program. So what we've been doing is a two-pronged approach to try and understand if we think this is going to work. We've done it on very small scale using like the World Bank's type of nimble trial thinking, where we've picked just one or two communities. One is an intervention group, one is a control group, very small scale, quick and dirty. Does it look like it's going to work? If it shows promise that actually the interventions are kind of roughly working or pushing people in the right direction. Then we've set up bigger studies, and we've done just a quasi-experimental control methodology, and that's what we've done because we just don't have the skill base, the money, etc., to do the RCTs. Plus, a lot of our interventions are kind of population-based type interventions, where there's a lot of noise, and maybe an RCT environment is more complex to manage.
Okay.
I just want to add, because I was as a head of program and also the deputy here, I was constantly running after them, the team, and saying, but when is it that you're going to verify when your impact is there? And you saw the slide that we usually forget, which is the maintenance aspect. We have a little bit of a tendency to think that we've designed a program and now they have changed behavior the first 2 months and then everything is fine, controls or not. But this thing about when are you going back to check whether you actually had the right impact, and what are the small successes along the way. For the whole grain, for example, on the bread, we didn't just go from having the children eating 100% white grain bread to white flour, bread to 100% whole grain bread. We actually staggered it. In some of the schools, they started with a 50-50. They're still on the 50-50. In other schools, they were doing 75 or 25 white wheat flour and 75 whole grain. And in other schools, they just went directly with 100%. There's a little bit of a difference on the results here, but it's just we were just being very mindful on when it is that you're going to go and check the different types of impact to really see that you have a sustained approach. Probably we wouldn't see this before in 5 or 10 years. But it doesn't mean that we cannot identify along the way where we have the different thresholds and at least invest in the maintenance part. I don't know if I make any sense. I hope so. We have another question. We have one question in the chat box. I saw Luele Falui. Sorry, I'm not saying it correctly, but please, you had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. This is Luay from UNDP Syria, working on person with disability support, disability inclusion. First of all, thank you very much. This is probably one of the best sessions I've attended during this Behavior Science Week. It's very simple, straightforward to the point. I learned a lot. And actually, I'm echoing Grace's question, the question in the chat box. I'm very interested in how to solve the first challenge of the lack of interest or confidence in behavioral science. How did our colleague who presented the example were convinced about to start a behavior informed intervention? Thank you.
Yeah, so I can't say I've been 100% successful across all units. There are still some units that are tougher nuts to crack than others, if I'm being totally honest. And this dependency on surveys, this love of surveys within the UN system slightly drives me bonkers. But the way I've been doing it is I've just been starting very small. And I've kind of been taking the burden of work. So, for example, with our school feeding, they were saying, you know, we're doing this already kind of thing. I said, you know what, let me just organise one co-creation event. You come along to it, you participate, I'll do all the hard grafting, I'll write all the mission terms of reference and everything like that. Come along, have it, like, see it in action, and then say what you think. And that was basically my strategy to try and take away the burden so they can actually see it. And that's been very successful, because as soon as they attend one of these co-creation events, as soon as they see people's involvement and engagement and excitement, as soon as they hear the people say, do you know what, WFP has never asked us to create the solution. We're so sick of WFP asking us all these survey questions, but not once have they asked us what we think the solution is. As soon as my colleagues have seen it in action, in practice, then they are converts, like really very, very quickly. Nana, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I just want to add before I gave over to Ivory, because she was the one who was very hard at convincing. Actually, it's quite funny. We have been working on a K-pop video for some cartoon characters, And I was walking around with different possible cartoon characters to all the staff, drivers, cleaners, everyone, and asked them to vote. So even in our own office, we were trying to kind of include everyone in the office, not just program. We have a sense when we're coming from program, we only do our own stuff, and we're hoping that all these support units are going to follow through at some point. But actually, we took this in and try to engage with all our staff, because if we need to have social behavior change, we also have to do it in the way that we work ourselves, and trying to avoid that this is only programs that are taking different types of decisions. Social behavior change is something across the board, and we need to engage everyone in the office. Takes a bit longer time, but it's a lot of fun, and people are really happy when then they see the results of the new cartoon that has been made. Ivory, maybe you can tell the story about how you got convinced.
Yeah, happily. So I think first of all, one of the issues with social behavior change is there's a lot of acronyms used around it, where if you don't understand what those acronyms are, you automatically disengage. And whereas with other perhaps units of operation within WFP, you're very exposed to the acronyms without having to then work within those units. So you have a fundamental understanding of what's happening, but because there's less social behavior change kind of work integrated into programming, as soon as you slip into acronyms of SBC or anything like this, it becomes incredibly alienating and you just avoid it. I think the way in which we were most convinced is that when Rowena came in, she was able to understand very quickly the bottlenecks that we were facing. So just, I mean, for the issue of whole grain, it was very clear that although we could give like a very good narrative in terms of the supply and the demand generation, we didn't really have a next step forward plan, which is always kind of the difficult thing, going from the pilot to scale. And Rowena was able to identify that and then make herself available as a resource as opposed to as an additional workload. So as a resource in the case of the example that I used of the packaging, just saying, oh, chatting to me casually, I know about these chocolate bar wrappers, and then I automatically thought, oh, okay, can you check this work for me? And then rather than coming back and, you know, just adding comments and just not really helping move it forward, she took ownership of the process and then showed how valuable it could be to then use her as a consultation and her team as a consultation. And as a result, automatically, you then see team members going to the SBC unit more often, just because they understand that this is somewhere where you can go, where you can get solutions for your problems. It's efficient. So yeah, this is kind of how I was convinced, and my colleagues around me.
I see Ananya having your hand up.
Hi everyone, good day. I'm Ananya. I'm connecting from India. So my question is like a good part of the presentation was covering how the entire supply chain process was worked upon to get people to eat healthier. So how about, like, how has the perspective change been brought in Armenia? Getting people to actually think that's important to eat healthy.
I don't think we're done yet. As you can see, the overweight rates are still 50%, and it's going to take a long time. But what we do see is some very funny things is how happy the kids are being able to make whole grain pizza in the schools. How much more people are asking questions about for example, whole grain products. So they actually want to engage, and then not just the communities, but actually also many of our donors and our partners or UN agencies also want to work more with us and are asking specifically for some more of this type of technical support on integrating social behavior change. We do hope it works. But I will probably let you know in 5 years' time, and hopefully we can see more of these types of let's say the hard facts like overweight rates or a decrease in non-communicable diseases going down. But it will require a lot of work and not just isolated to this. The Ministry of Health have reached out with a lot of different campaigns, and we are trying to also engage with our sister agencies to be able to have a broader platform within the UN to address the bigger issues as well, or more issues at the same time. Just putting that because Ravina is then sending my evil eyes saying, please make sure that you're not trying to solve everything in one go. And I think this is just important. I need to highlight that because she is totally right. We were trying to solve everything at one time. It's like when we go to a community, we think, oh, I'm going to solve everything and then I'm going to tell them everything and then everything is fine. But this thing about having a focused approach and saying, I'm only going to look at this is also something that we really had to learn as a program unit and as a country office. I hope I was responding to your question.
That helps. Thank you so much.
Can I just add, Nana, just one point as well, is that we've tried to not go against the trends. So in the past, when we've asked, we've looked at nutrition from a nutritional point of view, but never do our target audience wake up on a morning and think, what should I eat for breakfast from a nutritional point of view? So instead, we've tried to understand, okay, well, what do you like to eat? What's your favorite foods? Like, what do you want to have for breakfast? And we've gone on that wants basis, and then we've just created healthier versions of them. We've used social marketing to promote them so that the kids think they're cool, the parents want to buy them and want to give their kids them, etc. So we've always gone from a wants as opposed to a needs point of view. As Nana said, we've still got a long way to go. It's slightly like pushing treacle up a hill, dealing with the obesity pandemic that is spreading across the world. But I think the key for me is that we've not thought about it from a nutritional point of view. We've knocked nutrition out of our equation, when before we were constantly just thinking about it from a nutritional point of view, not a human point of view.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Jim Lee, I see you have your hand up as well.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Lee Barua. I work with UNICEF. With the India office, and I work in a state called Madhya Pradesh. I'm a social behavior change specialist, and I work on integrated and convergent programming on various areas, various outputs actually, health, nutrition, education across the world. Very, very happy to see this presentation. I find it very, very useful and very, very interesting. I have 3 points on which I would like to hear more from you. I noticed at the beginning of your presentation itself that obesity among boys seems to be very high compared to girls. So when you're designing this program or designing the program strategies, did you look at the gender dimensions? And how did you integrate them into your programming? That's one. The second one is I saw, I think perhaps when I saw the slides with elephants, that you had probably used nudge techniques or nudge tactics. So just would like to understand where exactly and how did you use nudge techniques particularly in this program, and at what point of time did you use them? And the third one is, what are some of your learnings from your program so far? As one of you explained that it's still work in progress, you're still working on it, and I wish you all the best. I'm sure you'll reach your goals. But your learning so far, if you can share some of that with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will just start with the first one around gender, because gender is a very pronounced issue actually here in Armenia, and there's a clear preference for boys. To be honest, it's the second country in the world which are having gender selective abortions, the second highest, or the second in the world, if you can say it like this. So there's also a tendency to think that the boys, they don't have to work at home, they don't have to do much at home, they are really deciding on what's being eaten. When we went to work with the children to co-create, the teachers were saying, no, you cannot have the boys cook. It was very interesting. And so, and why are they engaged? They just have to be sitting there and being the end receiver of whatever the girls are coming up with in the school kitchens. Actually, we insisted on the boys, on the equal opportunities for both boys and girls to learn. And the funny thing is, the boys were so engaged. They were so happily engaged. They were proudly running around. I was in the school last week, so they were proudly running around showing the pizza and bragging, this is my design, whatever. And it was very funny. I asked them subsequently if they wanted to to engage at home as well, help out, cook dinners, or engage in the family, work on that. And they really wanted to. They just lack the opportunities to actually be educated. They lack the opportunities to get this type of practical learning, because they have just been told, eat carrots, eat green leafy greens, do this and that. So our nutrition, we are working on nutrition curriculum here, and we are being extremely practical, not just showing them K-pop videos, but actually having this as a platform, saying they have to learn by doing, and that's how we engage both boys and girls.
Fantastic.
I think in relation to your second 2 points, actually they're slightly integrated. They influence each other's answers. So we have been applying nudges. We've been applying nudges in relation to the setup of school canteens, but also working with local shops. You might say the layout of the shops, kind of for choice architecture type initiatives around healthy eating, so that basically children are more primed or subconsciously choose the healthy products over the unhealthy products. However, I will say, when linked to the evaluation, when we've trialed different interventions, when we've just focused on a nudge intervention, it's not been successful. It's more when we've done the whole systems approach. So when we've used all 4 levers of change. So when we've looked at the design environment, kind of your nudge, classical nudge type agenda, but where we've also looked at support, like services and products that can support the desired behavior change. We've looked at the control mechanisms, and we've looked at the kind of inform and educate type lever of change. When we've used all 4 levers of change simultaneously, we've been much more successful. And I think it's because with healthy eating, it's a habitual behavior. So if you've got a one-off non-divisible behavior, the nudges seem to, for me, from my experience of applying them, they work really well, they're cheap, they're effective. But when you've got these habitual behaviors, it is more complex. So you've got to create this supportive environment. You've got to do kind of top down and bottom up simultaneously. And so that's why the evaluation for us has been really important, this nimble trials, this quick and dirty type data, because straight away we can see, actually, when we've just applied the nudges, they may work in the short term, they may work for a couple of weeks, but eventually they just revert back to their negative habits. But when we do the whole systems approach, we use all 4 levers of change, that's where we've had the most success, if I'm being honest, with this obesity, healthy eating, nutrition type agenda.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is very useful.
I see we have some comments in the chats. I don't know, Irina, if you want to come in asking the questions. It's saying there are some team members with background in psychology and cognitive science that are helpful in designing the studies for working with the challenges. It's more for Irina actually to respond to.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much for reading my question. And also following up to this, what you were just talking about, I was also curious if there is a cultural integration and understanding those issues. So for example, you were talking how, in difference between genders in Armenia is that boys have very different responsibilities from girls when it has to do with housekeeping. So I was wondering if in your study that if in your studies that is considered, and if it is, how is it approached? Because I feel like maybe apart from personal habits, there's also this larger system of what a culture is and how people are supposed to behave. So there's particular schemas that maybe make it harder to make a change. So yeah, I was wondering how is that being approached in the projects?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So the gender agenda is very strong within the UN system, but actually from a behavior change point of view, of course, understanding those gender dynamics is really important, but it only takes you a certain way. You need to also understand not just the gender dynamics, but the inter-household dynamics. So, for example, what power do the boys or the men have within the household? What's the influence of the mother-in-law, etc.? And the mother-in-law in our region has quite a lot of power often. And I used to work in the Middle East, and the mother-in-law had huge power and influence in that region as well. So I think when all our projects are based on really carefully done formative research to look at the cultural, social, behavioral dynamics, but also the gender, and then how that influences the inter-household dynamics as well. So we've looked at that in a lot of depth. It is something that we are changing and influencing, as Nana said. You know, we've started off quite small by just challenging the teacher's assumption of the roles of boys and girls within the kind of home economics cooking arena. But we are doing projects where we are trying to create these supportive environments to challenge the social norms so that people who have made change, it's easier for them to sustain the change. So we can't change the social norms. Well, we can, but it takes a long time, and we never really have the budget to do that. So instead, we've looked more to change and create a more supportive environment. So for those that have changed, it's easier for them to sustain. And to do this, of course, we've not just targeted the women or the men, but we've tried to target them as whole family units, so that inter-household dynamics again. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, in sorts. I guess one of the concerns that I'm having is, as you were mentioning, you know, this integration into the classrooms, and then talking about, you know, those boys not being expected to participate. I'm just wondering, like, how long-term that would work, or that would be, considering I come from Russia, to explain, and we also have like a similar system in school where girls are taught how to take care of the house, how to clean, how to sew, and boys are taught how to do woodwork and electrical things. And so I think that's you know, coming in as an outsider and proposing a change, or saying like, oh, well, but why? I mean, maybe it would have a short-term sort of result, but I'm wondering how in the long term, if you have research stating that those sort of interventions would, you know, be helpful in trying to approach those issues, I guess. Yeah, that.
Can I? Yeah, I mean, we don't have the long-term research yet because we just established this unit in January this year. So hopefully we will be able to share something maybe in 5 or 10 years time. I do have to come back a little bit to the end consumer, the children themselves, and seeing how they are breaking out of these silos. Because once you give them the opportunity to actually take part in this case, the cooking classes, they were so engaged and so happy. And it comes with also, we're back into the demand and supply. If we're able to get the children to demand as well to acquire this type of knowledge. We've been setting up hydroponic greenhouses where the children are making strawberries, and you have equal participation both from the boys and girls, and they're really happy about it. So giving them the opportunity to actually access or being equal, I think is the first step. Does it work? I don't know, but Arena, I'm from Denmark, and we also have cooking classes with the boys, and we also have the other classes with the wood. Well, I grew up with that, equal participation by both boys and girls. So I guess it is possible, but it takes time, I'm sure. I see Rula was having a question as well around lack of service accessibility. Do you want to explain this one? Rula? No. I can just try and there is in the chat saying, what about lack of service accessibility and lack of cooperation in providing the services? Of course, due to poor accountability, what is the best approach to deal with it? I'll go back to the example of Ivory, which is a typical program way where we're trying to solve problems along the way. Oh, we want them to do this. Oh, there's no whole grain wheat mill. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's do this. I think working along all chains and not assume that everything is just working is the first step. On the lack of service accessibility, we're actually working on integrating social behavior science within our social protection efforts. As you know, WFP is very often providing cash or assistance to get people to access food assistance. But how do we actually looking into changing their behavior so they don't need the service? That's one of the big challenges that we're trying to work on now. So sometimes lack of service, depending on how you actually understand the question, maybe I don't understand the question. The lack of service, for example, on basic social services may not necessarily be a bad thing in case you are sitting in a country where people are over relying on social services and they don't want actually to get out of that reliance. Are there any more questions? Let me just check.
If you have some time, I would really appreciate if you would be able to answer also about the psychology. If you have people in your team from psychology or cognitive science and how they were able to help with those issues.
Yeah, basically that's me. That's my background. We have been trying to employ national staff that come with that background. It's not always been easy because often when people study psychology, they seem to then go into, they want to go into counselling, mental health service provision. They don't necessarily want to go into social behaviour change. But the way we're doing that is we're trying to work with the public health teams here, because they have a good understanding of this population health need. Social behaviour changes covered on their course, so we've been trying to work with them to build capacity through that channel, offer internships, etc. So that's how we've been trying to develop more and more capacity within the country, so there is no reliance on international staff in the future to fulfill this role. But it is a bit of a challenge at the moment, and we have been trying to work to overcome it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can just say from a country office perspective, it's not super easy either. First of all, we're a small country office and having to battle to get someone like Ravina and having to battle to be able to say we are having a unit on this when the whole organization wants to have the few experts there are sitting in headquarters or somewhere else. But so that's one element from a country office perspective. It is definitely something that I have seen the results so far, and I'm really happy we took this decision on saying we actually want to try and look into integrating social behavior science to make sure that our programs are also working in 10 years' time, that we are not just having successes on our programs for 1 or 2 years and then we leave or we do something else, and then when we come back 5 years later, nothing has actually changed. Maybe the irrigation is still there, but nothing really has changed. So I do hope that we will be able to reconnect with all of you in 5 years' time and can explain that things have actually been sustained. We are over time. We're done, I think. So I do hope that you have enjoyed listening to us today. If not, I'm sad about it. If you have any questions, do feel free to reach out to the WFP Armenia country office staff. We have more examples than what we showed you today. So please reach out to us if you want to work with us as well. So
thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Enjoyed it very much. Very useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where could we reach out to you again?
We will drop in the chat our email addresses. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.